Hello, and good evening, and thank you so much for joining us on this somewhat wet and windy Wednesday as we celebrate a little program called The Power of Words. This event is part of the Ireland Reads campaign. Ireland Reads Day is on Friday, this Friday, the 25th of February. And over the next hour or so, we're going to have a little chat with authors, presenters, learners, librarians about the power of words. My name is Bob Johnston. I'm the owner of the Gutter Bookshop in Dublin, and I also work with Bookselling Ireland, who are one of the organisers of this evening. Ireland Reads is a public libraries campaign to get the whole country reading, leading up to National Reading Day this Friday, the 25th of February. The idea is to celebrate reading and all the benefits that it can have for us and for enjoyment and for well-being. You can obviously find out more at islandreads.ie. So this event has been organised by the Libraries Ireland, the National Adult Literacy Agency, NALA, Publishing Ireland and Bookselling Ireland. So thank you again all for joining us here this evening. I hope you enjoy it. We want to enjoy it. And the idea is really to explore the power of words, about losing yourself, the joys and the comforts of reading. Words matter to us all. We use words all the time, every day. We speak, we read. Words are how we communicate with each other, how we share our opinions, our feelings, and stories. And those stories give us access to another world, to another place, and to other people's lives. So hopefully over the next hour or so, we can talk about that with our guests, and I'm very happy to be here with you. And our first guest this evening is somebody whose love of book literally oozes out of his pores, shall we say. Rick O'Shea is an RTE radio presenter. He presents the Radio 1's book show. He runs the island's largest book club with the Rick O'Shea Book Club via Facebook and online. And he curates and hosts literary events. And we're delighted Rick is here with us. I can see his happy face there, smiling away at me. So we're going to have a quick talk with Rick maybe about books and reading. Welcome, Rick. Thank you for being here.
Thank you, Bob. And let's first of all point out how weird this is for you and I, two people who know each other in the real world, having a conversation with each other here, where I'm not really sure what you're going to ask me. Our conversations are normally in your bookshop, where I'm pointing at stuff or asking you, do you have something? Now you're asking me all the questions. I really like that I have no idea where this is about to go.
Yeah. The fun of asking a presenter who's used to quizzing people about things, questions, is somewhat daunting. But look, we bond over our love of books, Rick, and we always have. And the chats we always have about books. So talk to me about books, I guess. Have you always been a big reader? Have you always loved reading?
Yeah, anytime I'm asked that, I think I need to scroll back and do the numbers right. So, I was one of those kids who I grew up at a point, obviously, where, as you can tell from the grayness and the lack of hair, I grew up at a point where mobile devices weren't a thing, where computers weren't really a thing until I was about 10 or 11. So whenever we would go on long drives down to Wexford, down for family holidays, first stop would be either Easton's on O'Connell Street, or we'd find somewhere on the way out. And I initially worked my way through the Famous Five, then the Secret Seven, then the Franklin Dixon books, so the Hardy Boys, the Alfred Hitchcock Three Investigators books, which I was horrified in later years to find out weren't actually written by Alfred Hitchcock. That was a major disappointment in my life. And it went from there through comic books. I read so many of those when I was a kid and through my teens and into my early 20s. And then I think I was about 9-ish, because I was in, as far as I remember, first, second, third, for like third class, maybe fourth class, something like that. And I went to Drimnagh Castle on the Long Mile Road in Dublin, if people know it. And we were in prefabs that year. And at the back of the prefab, we had the library. Now, the library was a bookshelf that was about the size of one of these little things here beside me. And we were told we could take whatever we wanted. And I pulled out a yellow looking book that I liked the look of, and I liked science fiction movies and science fiction TV series. And it was a book of short stories by Arthur C. Clarke. And the first story I read, and it was called The 9 Billion Names of God, which is still one of the great science fiction short stories of all time. And that started me then on a road to reading what we all call adult books these days. Because, YA wasn't a thing. It didn't really exist. And at some point, you made that jump. And for me, that was it. And here I am 40 years later.
Yeah, it's interesting, isn't it? Genres, and we can talk maybe a bit about genres of writing. And, when we talk about genres, we maybe talk, as you say, science fiction or romance or horror or, all those westerns, all of those different kinds of books that people enjoy. And it's funny you mentioned science fiction because my dad was never a reader. My dad never read books, really. I've always been a huge reader, and my mum has. But my dad never was. But the one thing he did have was Arthur C. Clarke, Isaac Asimov, those kind of Philip K. Dick, those science fiction greats. My dad was a big he was computing and engineering, all of those kind of things. And it always fascinated me that was the genre that he found that he liked. So are you particularly drawn to science fiction? Are you still, this was obviously what brought you into, as you say, kind of adult reading. But what do you enjoy reading now? And, do you still enjoy science fiction?
Well, firstly, I think your dad and I would have had a lot to have talked about, and I can understand why. If he was, an engineer, a computer person, like a man of science, those kinds of writers, the Arthur C. Clarkes of this world, they were like hard science fiction writers. I remember reading interviews with Clarke in later years where he talked about the rigors that went into making sure that everything he talked about in his books was theoretically possible according to the laws of physics, apart from the stuff that he just made up. I was hugely into science fiction, really up until kind of my early 20s. I fell away for a really long time, for like a decade or 15 years or more. I got back into it about 10 years ago properly and started making inroads into the people that I'd never had a chance to read before. And in particular, these days, there are just huge tranches of incredible science fiction writers, not just in our part of the world, but around the world as well. So I found myself reading science fiction in translation too. So when I need something, and again, because like you, I read a lot for work purposes as well as reading for fun. So if I'm going through a phase where I'm reading a lot for events that I'm doing or festivals that I'm doing or just work stuff in general, I have an entire to be read shelf that is simply science fiction books that I've bought for myself that have yet to be read, and they're all sitting there on the shelf. And then it'll be the J.G. Ballard is next, the Xi Liu is next. I still have a bunch of Ian Banks culture novels that I haven't read. So yeah, that for me is comfort reading. Having said that, the vast majority of the reading I do is probably literary fiction. It's quite these days, just because of the extraordinary amount of it that is so brilliant. It's Irish literary fiction because we're kind of, I hate to use the phrase, but living in one of those golden ages of literary fiction in Ireland. So I find myself reading a lot of that. I used to read a lot of nonfiction as well, like most men and like most men of my age. And I kind of fell away from nonfiction for a long time. I had to kind of force myself back into it. I'm one of those people who's so anal, he will balance out fiction books with non-fiction books. I kind of go, I haven't read non-fiction in a while. I better find something on the shelf that will fit that, just to give myself some sort of balance over the year. But it's genuinely a little bit of everything.
Yeah, it's interesting there. You've talked about kind of falling out of the habit of reading. And I think a lot of people relate to that, will sympathize that it's one of those things. And I run a bookshop, and actually I found reading the last couple of years with everything that's been going on incredibly hard, and I've actually gone back to reading kind of classic murder mystery, Agatha Christie type things, because that is what's brought me comfort over the last couple of years. And there's nothing wrong with comfort reading. It's like comfort eating. It nourishes us in a certain way. So, I mean, for people maybe who have fallen out of that habit of reading regularly or don't enjoy reading anymore, I mean, how did you kind of find your way back, if we can put it in that kind of slightly overblown terminology?
Because in particular with conversations that I've had online and in the book club with readers and even with writers themselves about their own reading that I've had in interviews over the last couple of years or so, people have found themselves falling off. Particularly 2020 was that year, because there were so many extraordinary things happening in our lives, and because we had no idea what was coming next, and because we were living in this news cycle from day to day to day, people found it really hard to just relax and read for pleasure without having to just check their phone every 10 seconds to see if the world had changed again. I think for me, I had little patches of it. I got away with it relatively easily, because for me, books have always been my escape from the real world. If I want to ignore what's going on everywhere, that's, phone goes in another room, and I'll spend a couple of hours, as I did today, reading a book of, feminist nonfiction about the transition from feudal times into early capitalism. That's just what keeps me knocking around. But for people that I've spoken to, and it's really weird because it worked for me a couple of times as well, reading shorter books. And I know that's a cheat, but if you find yourself something extraordinary that's 120 pages long, and I found myself one book already this year, which is They by Kay Dick. I think I have that right. It's a book from 1977. It's British speculative fiction. It's just been reprinted, and it's just out brand new. It's fallen out of print for years, and it's less than 100 pages, and it's a series of interlinked short stories in a kind of ominous dystopian future United Kingdom. And that, for me, is one of the best things I've read this year. Less than 100 pages. I think for people, you can do that, or as you said, you can do exactly what you do, which is, if there is a genre you love, if there is something that is immediately going to light your fire, just where there's no such thing as comfort reading, it's all reading, it's all things that you find enjoyable. They're great little ways, I think, of potentially reigniting your reading. I did it the hard way years ago. I went through a phase, I think in my kind of 30s, where I was reading a dozen books a year, 13 books a year, 14 books a year maybe. And very briefly, one year, I decided, fine, I'm going to make a difference, because there were too many books every time I went into a bookshop, and I was seeing things that I knew I was never going to get to read. That anxiety that we all feel when we go in and go, there's just, I'm never going to get to all of this. And I decided to read 100 books that year. I think it was 2014, 2015. And I read 100 books that year, and I cut everything else out of my life. I stopped watching pointless television that I was just flapping my way through, and afterwards going, well, that was all right. And I spent a lot of time reading, and I found things that I wanted to read. And by the end of the year, I'd read 100 books. And since then, because that kickstarted what I do, on average, I read about kind of 80 books a year now at this stage. And I just never look back.
It's good. It's impressive. It's a big number. I mean, from everything you said about, kind of getting back into reading, I've read some Enid Blyton this year. I'm going to say it. I went back there because sometimes it's just what you need. And as you say, I don't think there's anything wrong with picking up a small book, a skinny book, or just reading some short stories, reading a comic. I don't know, whatever grabs you, I think is a good. And I think for so many people, and certainly, again, talking to people in the bookshop, what you get is, I'd forgotten how much I enjoyed it. You forget how lovely reading can be for you. Do you have times of the day that you specifically read? Do you set aside certain hours, or do you just roll with it?
If you're interested, Bob, I can give you my entire week. So look, I don't have time to do it in the morning. I've got to get up, walk the dogs, have breakfast, and then go to work. So when I come home from work in the afternoon, and after I've walked the dogs again, sometimes there's maybe a couple of hours there, which if I've got work reading to do, I can do that there. Now, I say work reading, it's usually I'm reading a novel, and it's somebody lovely I'm going to talk to. So that's done on the sofa downstairs with a dog in my lap. Some evenings of the week, we'll pick a couple of hours, myself and Liz will just take an hour and a half and go, we're just going to read for a little while. Let's do that before we turn the TV on. And then every night before I go to bed, I read for 30 minutes, 40 minutes, 50 minutes before I go to bed. Weekends, again, there's a lot of time spent on the sofa. I have quite a big groove in the sofa downstairs from just me sitting there reading at weekends, weekend afternoons, and just finding that time, that space. But for everybody, it works differently. So for some people, I know, like my brother, got out of the habit of reading for years until certainly pre-COVID. He was traveling in and out to work, and it was about an hour and 10 minutes every day on the bus. And he managed to get himself back into the route, because that's 2 hours of reading time for him every day. And then it just got worse and worse and worse. And he found himself reading books off his phone while he was at the photocopier, photocopying large documents. And then it just took over most of his day in a brilliant way.
Yeah, it is. There's something around just finding that time, even if it's only for kind of 15 minutes, I think that, that then gets you hooked and then you can build it up, as you say. But I think just even taking those little steps just to kind of introduce, and again, just remind yourself of that time, giving yourself that time to do it, I think is important, but it's also lovely. I think it's giving yourself permission to switch off, which I think we all need, especially at the minute.
It is, but it's like, as you said, it's not a job. It's giving yourself permission to have fun. It's giving yourself permission to enjoy yourself. And sometimes we need to be told, you can just take an hour and do something that you enjoy doing. And if that's reading for you, then you just need to box off that time and make it happen.
Well, I completely agree with you, Rick. You'll be surprised to hear. Thank you so much for joining us and sharing your reading with us today, and for being our first guest on this Power of Words webinar that's celebrating Ireland Reads Day coming up this Friday. Next up, we have our guest, Shauna Gilligan. Shauna Gilligan's an adult literary tutor and an English teacher working in the education unit in Portlaoise Prison. So Shauna's going to talk to us a bit about finding your voice through words, and two specific learning projects that she's been working on. We're also very lucky. Shauna will play a couple of segments from recorded by the students that she's been working with. So Shauna, you're very welcome, and thank you so much for joining us.
Thanks very much, Bob. It's lovely to be here, and thank you to the IPS and LOETB for facilitating bringing the learners to this webinar, and also the recording of our students. So it was wonderful listening to Rick and yourself chat there, Bob, about the joy of reading and sort of the comfort reading can bring to us. And I suppose just adding on to that in terms of the theme of the power of words, part of the work that I would do as an adult literacy tutor in Portlaoise Prison is helping students to find their voice through reading, and around the power of words. It's not just books, it's also about the spoken word as well, about storytelling, perhaps even singing, the everyday written word, from reading bills to shop orders, letters, newspapers, really anything that you might need to communicate as part of your life. So for us, when we're talking about reading, and this is where this wonderful campaign comes in, the Ireland's Reads campaign, is really thinking about reading in a broader context as well. It's about comfort, but it's also about communicating, So just give some background on sort of the sort of work that we would do in the education unit, and like other adult education units, it is looking at education from an adult education perspective and about learning as an exchange and sort of communicating with each other. We've partners with other national institutions like the National Library of Ireland, who've donated some duplicate books to us, and also with NALA, and I'm going to talk about two of those projects this evening. But I suppose firstly, there's a few points worth mentioning about adult literacy and the power of words. And it's quite astonishing to consider some of the facts around literacy in Ireland today. 1 in 6 adults struggle with everyday reading tasks. That's about 500,000 adults. And it can be for many reasons, from unaddressed intergenerational literacy needs, educational needs that were not met. It could be financial poverty. It could be our two-tier education system. Indeed, unmet physical and mental health needs, just to name a few. Another thing I think we need to really think about when we're talking about the power of words and reading is that literacy is not linked to intelligence. A beginner reader is certainly not a beginner thinker. And then I suppose finally, just to note that while many people have some literacy skills, they just might need to improve their fluency and develop confidence in reading. And this is sort of ties into what Rick was saying, and yourself, Bob, as well, about, the timing of reading as well is so important. And we've all gone through difficult times in the last few years with COVID, and maybe our attention spans haven't been, up to our usual selves. So I think that you can bring that into our, talking about literacy as well. I'm going to quote Simon Harris, TD for further and higher education, research, innovation and science. And he said a really interesting piece. He just very shortly, he said that we have to challenge the misconception that an inability to read, write or digitally communicate is a failure of the person. It is a failure of society and the state. So I suppose just in the work that I would do and the projects I'm about to talk about, we would support and facilitate learning. And much as what we do is about building confidence. And if I think about the work and the students that I've met over the years and my colleagues also, and the joy it brings from reading a short text, a long text, being able to fill out a shop order, being able to read your own personal letter, being able to write your own personal letter. These are all things that bring joy to people who may not have been able to do them previously. And from here, we've seen that some students might try to read short texts, and NALA have a number of series of books that we've used, and I know they're used across the country. Quick reads, there's their latest Voices book as well, which is fantastic. It has a workbook as well. And then you just see people's confidence growing from there, and they feel able to express themselves, more competent to communicate, and maybe having the self-esteem to say, actually, I'll further my learning. I might do a computer course now on top of that. We'd often meet students who have different literacy needs and who might be able to help each other in class. And this happened with a pilot project in 2018, where we trained a number of students in conjunction with NALA and Waterford Institute of Technology, and they trained to become literacy tutors. So it was a wonderful project that enabled students to help each other, and it was a peer-to-peer project. So again, if we tie this into the power of words, it's about giving people confidence and the skills to help each other. And so this programme, it didn't only educate the men who were involved in the project, but actually it also helped people find their voice, being able to talk about inequalities they'd encountered in society, returning to learning as adults, and the chance that adult education can give everybody. These students actually are still engaged in peer-to-peer literacy work under the supervision of the education unit in the prison. So now we're going to hear stories of two of the students that I worked with, and each short piece, it's about a minute or two. It highlights the different aspects of the power of words and of finding your voice. And the first student we're going to hear from now was one of the men who participated in the training to become a literacy tutor. And we're going to hear this audio clip now.
I come from a poor socio-economic background with parents that could not read or write. They struggled with everyday tasks such as shopping, paying bills or booking appointments. However, they ensured that illiteracy would not become intergenerational. No. Often taking extreme measures to get me out of bed for school, such as pouring a pot of cold water over me at 8 a.m. On reflection, reading has brought me to places my mother and father could only dream of. The more I read, the more my ability to articulate myself increases. It gives me confidence that in almost any context I can hold my own. For example, tasks such as paying bills, making applications, reading books, or dissecting research for my Open University studies do not concern me. Unlike my parents, who may have been afraid to take opportunities, such as further training, work or travel because of fear or embarrassment, I embrace such challenges. As a result, I am the first in my family to attend university, to study for a degree and to teach people. I've worked abroad, and following the completion of my Masters, I intend to do so again. Without reading, most of this would have been unattainable. I say to anyone starting out, reading opened these doors for me. There is no reason it cannot do the same for you.
I think you'll agree that is very inspiring words, certainly at the end there, where the student said that reading opened doors for him. And I'd like to thank that student for sharing his story so generously with us here this evening. And again, to the IPS and our FET manager, Inclusion in LOETB, for facilitating the recordings. So the second student we're going to hear from now was involved in another project, which it was a project which involved students who wanted to write their own set of books to help others. And it was really inspired by the NALA Open Door series and the Dublin Adult Literacy Centre series of books. And they produced a set of books written by their students. So we worked with NALA on writing the books and producing 10 books for emerging readers. And the student we're going to hear from now was involved in this project. And the book that he wrote was about his experience with a project called the Story Dads Project. So this is an initiative run in the prisons by the Home Economics Department, and it helps students connect with their children through reading. And it's a lovely project. And I just want to say before we hear that the illustrations that are going to come up on screen, they are by students as well in the education unit. So if it's okay, we can hear the clip now, please.
This is a story I wrote about reading to my children. The Story Dad. In prison I go to the school. In school there are lots of different classes and activities. The teacher told me about Story Dads. It is a great way to keep in contact with your kids. It is also a great way to bond with your kids. The teacher records you reading a storybook of your choice to your son or daughter. You get to send your kids the storybook and a CD of you reading the story. I picked out my two sons' favourite story, Cars. At home we watched the movie like 100 times, so I thought they would love to hear me reading it to them. I really enjoyed reading the book. When I read it, I pictured them in my head listening to the story. The teacher then posted out the storybook and a CD to my sons. A week later, I saw my sons on a video call. My sons told me that they loved listening to the story and they were so excited when they heard my voice. That made me so happy.
And again, thank you to the student for sharing his story and for reading the book that he wrote. I think the last words in that book, that made me so happy, really sort of sums up the power of words and the possibilities of reading and education for transformation. So that's it from me, I think, for this evening.
Well, thank you, Shauna. Thank you so much for that. And I think it was so interesting to hear those men talking about their experiences of reading and of the power of words. And I think the thing that really came through for me was around passing literacy on to their children and passing on a love of stories and a love of reading from one generation to the next. And that I feel comes across very strongly. Do you agree?
I would agree, absolutely. And I think it ties in, very nicely what we're all talking about this evening is the power of words. And regardless of, the length of the book or the type of the book, words can have such meaning and help us connect with other people as well as sort of escaping whatever reality that we're in.
Well, thank you. Thank you so much, Shauna, for joining us on this event this evening. Thank you again for everybody who's out there and listening to us talk this evening. For anybody who came in late, this is a Power of Words event to tie in with the Ireland Reads campaign, which takes place this Friday, the 25th of February, and celebrates reading and celebrates taking the time to read and to enjoy books. And books can be in any form. We tend to think about them as a paper object in our hands, but libraries also supply audio books. You can listen to books. You can read them on your e-reader. You can read them on your phone. What people are being asked to do is to pledge some time this Friday just to stop for a moment and to read and to enjoy that reading. So our next guest this evening is a person who gives us those words for us to read. Laura McKenna has a debut novel coming out called Words to Shape My Name. And you're very welcome, Laura. Thank you so much for joining us.
Here.
There we are. We can hear you now. That's it. You're good to have you here. Tell us a little bit about your novel, Laura. There's a character in it, Tony Small, and he almost takes a journey into reading.
He does. So Tony Small, in the novel, he's based on a real person, and Tony Small was the manservant of Lord Edward Fitzgerald, one of those sort of mythologized figures from Irish history. And he was an escaped slave, and the two men met in 1781 at the end of the Battle of Eutaw Springs in the American Independence Wars. And ever after they were together, and Tony Small worked as Lord Edward's manservant. So as you said, his journey that he had to reading, if I think about it, probably sadly began with his abduction from his home country when he was enslaved. So when he was taken from what I believe was probably West Africa, and he was then enslaved in America. And that was probably the start of his journey. And it certainly was the start of being aware of the power of words, because I suspect that his name was probably changed from the very moment he was put on board a ship and taken to America. His own real name was taken. So names and words are sort of closely associated with identity. And Tony Small was called many things during his time with Edward Fitzgerald. And of course, they were such a powerful family in Ireland, but they wrote about him a lot in their letters. And he was called many things. And even that use of words is interesting. He was called Poor Tony and Faithful Tony. But interestingly, he took back, again, some power over words himself and referred to himself near the end as Mr. Anthony Small. But so his journey to reading in the novel, he was traveling through North America and was longing to read. He saw men about him. And it's funny how it echoes. I've just been listening to Shauna and to Rick. And it's interesting, the parallels with what they're saying. He was looking at other men receiving letters and receiving word from home. And it really got me thinking about the use of the word in that context. They received word, and there was that instant connection to home. And he had none of that. He had no connection and, no way of learning. So in the novel, he is so eager to join that group of men who are able to read and to make connections. And that's the start of his journey when he learns to read there in North America.
And how did you come across this story? How did you find out about Tony?
Well, I first came across it in a biography about Edward Fitzgerald, actually, by Stella Tilliard. And it was the story really of Edward Fitzgerald. I mean, some people may not know of him now. He used to be, I suppose, very well known as a historical figure because he was sort of glamorous, and he was from this big, huge family, and he was really well off, and he became, a figure of the rebellion of 1798. So he also gets a lot of words attached to his name, that he was doomed and tragic and all of that. But in that biography, there is this figure there all the time, this man, Tony Small, who's his manservant, who accompanies him everywhere, who's referred to in letters. And I just wanted to know more about him and about what became of him. So a man who actually really changed his own life, I think. He made his own escape from slavery. He decided to accompany Fitzgerald to Ireland. He actually set about finding a way to learn how to read, to learn how to write, and made his own way after the death of Fitzgerald. He set up a business. So that kind of introduction to reading and writing allowed him to become independent. And I was very taken with the words, Shauna mentioned how it's not just, it's all those wonderful things that Rick mentioned about joy and getting into other worlds. And it's about communication, and it allowed him to connect with other people. There's some, letters. We know that Tony Small, while he lived in Ireland, he actually communicated and wrote to other servants. So he had that level of communication. He also wrote to the Fitzgerald family. So it allowed him to make those sort of connections, to get along in the world, but also the connection that Shauna alluded to there about connections with his daughter. So in the book, he uses storytelling with her as well as teaching her to read and write. So he has passed it on to her as well. And it's those sort of scenes of how, really demonstrate, I think, that power of words and how much it meant to him in those days. And he was also engaged in reading. Around that time, the abolitionist movement was very active. And of course, Tony then in the novel reads an account, one of these slave narratives. And he reads about, another fellow who made his own escape from slavery and then wrote about it. And by the end of the novel, Tony is writing his own account. So he's finding his own voice too. So there's so many parallels with what I've already heard tonight. It's very interesting.
Yeah, I suppose what jumps out at me from what you've been saying there is, you were reading a biography without this intended as such, but you're reading away in a biography, and that starts your brain thinking and leads you to more stories. And did you enjoy researching it? How did you go about researching it? Sounds fascinating.
I mean, it's exactly that. It's the kind of, I read this book, I became really interested in this man. He captured my imagination and I wanted to know more about him. And so, yes, I did set about researching and I absolutely loved it. It wasn't something I'd ever really done before, but I just read all around. I read all old kind of travel accounts so that I became familiar with life in, say, Canada during those years and traveling down the Mississippi. I read various other accounts of the rebellion and accounts of other men such as Tony Small who had escaped slavery and how they wrote about it. And of course, what was interesting too, again, it relates to finding voice, but there were pressures on those people even then about what they wrote. They had to write it in a certain way. And in the novel, Tony is also under certain constraints. Some of what he says is edited and censored. And, he kind of rebels against that. He resists it too, just so that he can have his own voice. But yes, I find the research and the reading, and I found I could get interested in anything in order to pursue a little detail. So, just wondering what they wore and what the smells were like. And you'd look up something and I'd get reading about things like dyeing factories, dyeing cloth, just to know these sort of things. There's so much to find out and so much that is interesting.
Yeah, I have to be honest. I find libraries absolutely incredible for this. I mean, they're mines of information and librarians who will help you find these things to read. And it has to be said, it's where libraries really come into their own. If you're interested in a topic, that there's advice there for you. There's people to help you find the information. And as you say, you can just take yourself on a journey into all kinds of things that you possibly didn't even know would interest you. So it's fascinating to hear how this story unraveled for you.
Yes, and I agree with you so much about libraries. And the other thing I found out is that people in libraries, librarians will point you in a direction and give you another angle on something that you hadn't really thought about. So I got pointers to things, geography. It's hard to explain, but they were pointing me towards maps and those sort of travel accounts and just areas I wouldn't have thought to look in. And it's funny where inspiration can come from, from very odd sources, and little things can happen by chance. But I love when I'm pointed in the direction of something that I would never have thought of looking for. So, you don't even know you're looking for it. And then suddenly, a librarian can kind of say, oh, there's this book, that might be of interest to you, even though it doesn't seem obvious. And of course it is. And I think as a writer, you tend to take from whatever source you can, whatever sounds interesting. And it's amazing what goes into a novel.
Indeed, and that's it. All that research that some of which you use, some of which you don't, but that you can use to give your book, that foundation of realism, but also just senses, as you say, what things look like, what things smelled like, what how people talked, how people walked, all of those things. I think sometimes we don't really, when we're enjoying a book, we don't think about that world that it creates for us and the research that went into creating that world. So the novel, Words to Shape My Name, is it all finished? What happens now?
Oh, it's all finished. It's actually out. It came out last year, in fact. Yeah. And yeah, it is. It was fabulous, and obviously I hadn't written one before, so it was really brilliant. I'm writing another novel too, but I find I'm still stuck almost with those characters in my head. I really got that. I can, things still happen, and it makes me think of them, And even after the book came out, with New Island. I got word, the day I got my first copies of the book, I was sent an email by a man who held the estate records of Lord Edward Fitzgerald, and he sent me a photograph of where Tony Small had signed for his salary every year, and his signature was on the page every year for about 8 years. And I just, it was really emotional, actually. I was very tearful seeing that, his signature written down there. It's a fabulous thing. And he signed for it proved the whole literacy thing, that he did read, he did write, and it was a wonderful occasion, actually. So yes, I have moved on, but they're still there, lurking around in my head.
And that way that the words have connected you across, whatever, hundreds of years, it's amazing, isn't it? That those words can connect you in that way.
Yes, it's such a powerful thing. And I mean, in the novel, there were so many layers to it. I mean, on one level, it's an adventure story. It's a relationship between these two men, but definitely the power of words, the power of finding your own voice, of naming and names, because that's in the title. It's just so important. And I was really interested to hear the links actually between the two, between Rick's talk earlier and Shauna's, and there were so many resonances there. And yes, reading and finding other worlds, which for my character occurred for him. It opened him up to kind of knowledge, to join and connect with other people. And as I said, communicating with his daughter and leaving his own account of his life. So for him, it really mattered. Yes, words really matter.
Well, thank you, Laura. So Laura McKenna, author of Words to Shape My Name. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you, Bob.
This evening. And up next, we have one more guest for you before we finish with a very special message from the amazing Marian Keyes, who is such a big supporter of books and authors anyway. But before we have a little message from Marian, we're going to talk to Mary Reynolds. Now, Mary is a Longford County librarian, and we've touched a bit on libraries there and how much we love them, but also how much they help people. So you're very welcome, Mary. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you very much. It's great to be here and to be among such great readers, because we wouldn't have libraries if we didn't have readers. And I just love to begin with a quote from one of my favourite writers, Emily Dickinson. And she said, "I know nothing in the world that has as much power as a word. Sometimes I write one and I look at it until it begins to shine." I think that's just incredible. And I mean, I love books myself. I think I have the best job in the world, working in a library where I meet all kinds of people, where I have an opportunity, I suppose, to nurture the reading habit in anybody from a very young child that comes in for the first time with their parent, to some of our book clubs where we can set up book clubs and encourage people to maybe try some new authors, because one of the things you find is that somebody likes a particular genre or a particular author, particularly a particular author that they love, and it's very hard to change them. So it's lovely to be able to introduce somebody to a new writer. And I think book clubs have, I have to say, Longford Rick O'Shea is is the oracle, and Rick O'Shea's book club, and people love to see what Rick O'Shea's book club is reading. So our book clubs, Rick, are very influenced by your book clubs. And your many book clubs. So book clubs, I suppose the other thing is, like, we meet writers all the time, and it's wonderful to introduce a new writer to an audience. So through, I suppose, book launches that we have, through I suppose, buying books by new authors and making them available to people, and creating that ambience and that space that we have in our libraries. I think somebody mentioned there about the little library they remember as a child, and I can remember my first library, which was the school library, where you had access to a whole, not a whole range of books, but you had access to maybe a very small selection of books. And I thought, when I became a librarian and was surrounded by all of these books, but not alone surrounded, but had that opportunity to talk to other people, who love books, but also to talk to people who maybe were coming into a library for the first time and said, well, sure, like, I've never read a book, and look at where I am, where I've got to. And, because there's so many different things happening, and there's so many different ways of reading, and particularly during the lockdown, I suppose, I'm thinking of our older people in particular, who, that awful word that we never want to hear again, cocooned, where people couldn't get out. And, from the comfort of, I suppose, their own armchair, they were able to travel to different worlds, escape into whole new worlds. And that's one of the things about books. I think when you sit down to read a book, you're very present in the moment. You're with the book. I don't know about some of the rest of you, but when I'm watching TV, I'm doing 10 other things at the same time. But when you sit down to read, you're totally in the moment, in that space. And, that's what I think is so powerful, about a book. And it's so powerful about, helping people in so many different ways to experience different things. You can experience so much through reading. So, I'm not by any means, I suppose I read all kinds of books. There's times, and particularly again, one of the things we noticed, one of the trends I suppose we noticed in libraries, was that people were reading, people were going back, some people were going back to the classics. For example, some of our readers here now, John McGahern, people would have gone back to McGahern, and you would say, well, maybe some of McGahern's work is quite dark. Other people were reading poetry. There's a huge interest in biography, history, so I think people were more reflective during that time, and we got lots of new readers, which would surprise maybe a lot of people. But because we have access to such an amazing collection of books through our online libraries, a lot of people sort of joined the library that way and were able to download their books. So we had something for everybody, I suppose, during that time as well. And that was very, very, very important. So just keeping people connected, that's very, very important. And making that link, with your, it's something very powerful that we experience as librarians, making that link between the reader and the book.
Yeah, it's interesting there that you've talked about how people are obviously so centered around your work. We always think, with bookshops and with libraries, that we're all about books, but actually we're all about people. We're about connecting people to books, but also with events and with authors and with writers to the world of books overall. I mean, are there any particular stories that stick with you from over the years about I don't know, individuals that have used your library, or
talking
people
about children, first of all. Yeah, one of the things, I suppose, when you talk about children, one of the things that really tickled me was a child saying to me, I thought all writers were dead. So, you know, the idea that the book, because the book is on the shelf, you know, and it must be about dead, you know, they must be dead people. So the excitement in a child when they got to meet a real writer. And that's the same excitement, I could say, with adults as well. You know, there was a man an older man that came into the library, one of our libraries there, one of our newer libraries the other day, and he's actually in a nursing home. So he was, you know, he came down actually in his wheelchair with the group, you know, from the nursing home, and he said to me, I thought libraries were very quiet places. I didn't know there were social spaces, and that really cheered me up, because, you know, we've I suppose in libraries we've battled for so long with this image of, and we love the quiet spaces, and people love quiet spaces, and I would be totally against having music, you know, when people want to come into a library. Some people want the quiet space, but other people come because it's a social space, and the opportunity of meeting other people, and maybe people that they wouldn't meet in other, you know, walks of life or other parts of their life. They meet people in the library, and, you know, when you hear these great discussions that take place, you know, in libraries, and sometimes I think librarians are a bit like hairdressers. People tell them, you know, the most intimate secrets because they feel very comfortable with them, you know, we feel very comfortable, and because it's a place that they come to on a regular basis. And I suppose also the fact that there's, you know, I think it's really important about libraries is that it's a place that doesn't have any labels attached to it. So, you know, nobody makes a judgment about you when you come into the library. And I think that's really important as well, so that somebody can come in and they can stay for, if they wish, you know, they can be just coming in to pick up a book, or they can come and spend the whole day there and nobody will move them on. You know, if some libraries now even have coffee machines, you know, so but we're very much about encouraging people to, you know, have different experiences in the library, you know. So it's not just about reading, you know, there are other things happening as well, you know, with, you know, exhibitions, but at the heart and soul of the library will always be the book, and matching the reader with the book that they want. I think that's really what libraries have always been about, and which we hope will continue into the future.
No, you're right. I think, you know, it always sticks with me that libraries are one of those last places we have left where you can go in, you can spend time there, and nobody's going to try to take money off you. You know, it really is a social space in terms of being a space for people, you know, people. And as you say, they can come to read, they can come to take out books, but certainly what we've seen over the last number of years is libraries embracing audiobooks and digital books, and any way that people want to access reading in all of its forms, you know. And I think that's not only important, but also something libraries have pushed so well for, you know, that they are there for the people in whatever they want.
Mm-hmm. And I think to become a writer, and I'm sure Laura would agree with me, to become a writer, you have to be a reader, you know, and that's really, you know, that's very, you know, I think that's absolutely essential, you know. And I love to see young people, and love to see that creating those spaces for teenagers, like to get teens, you know, because you know, it can be a group activity or it can be an individual activity. And, you know, that's why people, I think, love book clubs, because they like to come and discuss books and share, and people are curious about what other people are reading. I mean, there's certain people, there's one particular individual that comes in, and after the weekend, they have all the book reviews. So the requests come in for all the latest books, you know. And so you have all kinds of people, you know, who come to the door of the library, and that's what makes the job so interesting, and that every day is different, and you know, it makes it feel as if the work we do is very, very worthwhile as well.
Yes, and it is, and I think there's a lot of love for libraries in Ireland, in particular in Ireland. As most people can tell, I grew up in the UK, and I'm here now 21 years, and part of why I've always loved being in Ireland is that love of books, that real love of literature, but also the appreciation for it, the fact that it matters and that it's worth something. And I think Ireland is fantastic for that, and hopefully it's something we can continue not only to hold on to but also grow, because I think that pride in literature, and when you look at Irish writers, I mean, for a small country we sure punch above our weight. I think we have so many talented writers in Ireland who are loved across the world, and actually we're going to hear from one of those in just a few minutes. So I guess this is the end of our Power of Words event. Thank you so much to everybody who's come and joined us this evening and listened to our wonderful guests talking about reading and about their love of books. Thank you so much for Libraries Ireland for organising this evening, along with the partners, with NALA and with Publishing Ireland and Bookselling Ireland. This webinar has been recorded and will be up on YouTube very, very soon. I know some of you are watching it live, but it's great if you can pass the word and point people in the directions. You can find it via Ireland Reads. And in fact, remember to visit the website, irelandreads.ie. And if you can, pledge to spend some time this Friday, National Reading Day, actually reading. So you can spread the word, use the hashtag, as we all like to do these days, hashtag Ireland Reads. Check out the website, check out the various people who have contributed this evening. I want to say a big thank you to our guests who have joined us this evening to talk about their love of books and reading. So thank you very much to Rick O'Shea, to Shauna Gilligan, to Laura McKenna and to Mary Reynolds for all joining us here this evening and for being part of this Power of Words webinar. Thank you all to the audience who have been here to listen to us, and hopefully you've enjoyed hearing us. And finally, we're going to end the evening with a special message for one of our most loved writers, Marian Keyes. So happy reading.
Hello, I'm Marian Keyes. I'm a writer, but far more importantly, I'm a reader. As a child, I was never comfortable in my own skin, and I always felt kind of wrong in the world. And then at the age of 6, I discovered Enid Blyton books, and it was like my saviour. From then on, and like right to this day, reading is the way that I mind myself. And I know an awful lot of people are terrified of reading, especially like big books, but all I can say is, if you think you don't like reading, trust me on this, you just haven't met the right book yet. Reading is how stories, I mean, it's all about stories, and stories are how we explain the world to ourselves and how we explain ourselves to ourselves. And because I read, I always have a companion when I have insomnia. It takes away my anxiety when I'm worried about stuff, which is always, because that's the way I am. I'm never bored. Even when I'm waiting in a queue in the post office, if I have a book on my phone, I don't have to be going mad going, the love of God, what's taking them so long? If you haven't been a reader, don't be afraid. It's meant to be something that is nice for you, not the opposite. As I said, if you don't like reading, you just haven't met the right book yet. It's a wonderful thing to have. I'm so grateful for it. And I'd love for you to have that too.